Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 123 of the Taking 20 podcast. This week all about DMing for younger players, my interview with Paul Lazrow. This week's sponsor, chairs. Remember, if you love someone, you should offer them a seat when they come over. After all, chairing is caring. As a reminder, we have a coffee, ko-fi.com/taking20podcast. Please consider donating to the podcast to offset some of the operational costs. Fair warning, this is a supersized episode like most of my interview episodes are. The relatively little editing I do is to slightly condense the episode for time purposes, but not to alter the content. I'd rather be respectful of my guests' answers than be a slave to the 20-minute format. That being said, thank you so much for listening. On with the episode. Being a DM for younger players requires a slightly different application of your skills behind the screen. I've run a few one-shots for kids, but I believe one of the hallmarks of wisdom is to know when other people are a heck of a lot more qualified than you are. So I reached out to the DM from adventuringportal.com, Paul Lazrow, who has DM'd many more sessions for kids than I ever will. How much do I believe in Paul as a DM? He's been a DM for my son multiple times. Paul, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and love what you do.
Excellent. Well, tell me about yourself.
Okay, sure. So honestly, I'm a video gamer. I started off as a video gamer. I still love video games. But I, grew up playing, Zork and Might and Magic. And I grew up during the Satanic Panic. And I guess because of that, I didn't know a lot of people that played D&D. I went through college and I didn't seek it out because I was very happy playing those games. It wasn't until after college that I had my real first experience playing tabletop role-playing games. Myself and a bunch of my friends got together and we played vampire, werewolf, and D&D. I was living in Japan at the time.
Oh, wow. So you kind of came to gaming a little bit later. I mean, like you, I grew up in the Satanic Panic. I found a couple of people in high school that were somewhat interested in the game, in Dungeons and Dragons at the time. But in college, I wound up early on my freshman year, somebody had hung up on Saturday mornings, we have a group that gets together in games. And so I kind of piled in down there. And that's where I discovered stuff like you mentioned, vampire. I discovered Mech Warrior and the like. So Mech Warrior, basically, which is just math with, hidden behind robots. That's all it was. Yeah,
cool. I have a distinct memory of being real happy at my computer playing, wizards, whatever, and thinking like, I don't want to go down in the basement, in the steam pipes all around, playing D&D.
Oh, no, I get that. Believe me.
Yeah, I feel foolish now, but it was a real thing.
So you discovered, you really kind of came into your own as far as gaming goes in college. How long have you been a dungeon master or been DMing?
On and off since then, just to kind of bring it a little bit up to present, a little bit before the craziness over the last couple of years, I got together with friends from different states. We were online, and I was running them through Lost Mines of Phandelver. Mm-hmm. My son and a couple of his Frozens being like, friends that are kind of cousins, but not really
right.
Family friends. Yeah. Anyway, it transitioned from that right into the mess. And, that summer, all these summer camps were being closed. Just kind of was having a blast running games with kids and wanted to continue. So tried Adventuring Portal, and here we are.
Excellent. So you started Adventuring Portal, I guess, what was it, 2020, 2019?
2019.
2019, excellent.
Back in the day.
Isn't it awful? It feels like with COVID, it feels like 2019 is back in the day.
Obviously I say that jokingly, but yeah, it's just like different lifetimes.
It really feels like it. because
Mm-hmm.
pre-COVID, obviously getting together in person was the norm, for most of my D&D groups.
And it's preferable, right? I'm not here as the founder of Adventuring Portal, like saying, "Oh, online gaming, it's way better than in person." It's always better in person. I mean, there's so many like negative parts to online gaming, but you can't have like players from Alaska and Florida get together and game.
Do all of your games both, I guess a two-part question, do all your games on adventuringportal.com use the D&D 5e system?
Yes.
And what about when you're not running games for kids on adventuringportal.com?
I have a board game group, and we trying Blades in the Dark right now. I've tried Esper Genesis.
Oh, I haven't played that one.
Yeah, I'm very excited about Spelljammer right now.
Oh, yes, me too.
Science fiction, that's my jam. I really like it. I only have positive things to say about Esper Genesis. I mean, they're going to be in trouble when Spelljammer comes out. On Roll20, you do not have the ability to level up your characters using the click, click, click.
Oh.
So they never made a full integration. Well, anyway.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, but I mean, what's another great one? Humblewood. I'm playing. That's fun. Yeah.
I guess one thing I would like, in your own words, how would you describe adventuringportal.com, what it is, what it does?
I mean, Adventuring Portal, we're a live guided online gaming service for kids. We run games after school. We run games during holidays and for summer camps.
Excellent. And what age ranges do you run games for?
When you talk about kids, obviously you can't have a 16-year-old and an 8-year-old together.
Right.
That's not a good recipe. So we try to break it up. We have 3 age ranges: the real young kids, 8, 9-year-olds. We try to keep kids that are players that are that young separate. And then, 10, 11, 12 is another range. And then, 13, 14, 15, 16 is the last range. Of course, there's a little overlap, but anything over 4 years is probably too much.
Absolutely. Especially when you talk about wide age ranges, I would imagine, a 16, 17-year-old can handle a much more complex plot than, say, a 9-year-old could.
Yeah. I mean, we've had it happen when they're siblings. The parents are like, look, take them together or don't take them. And then, I have to kind of go around and make sure everyone else is okay. Because putting together a group, everyone has to buy in, right?
Absolutely. So are all your games on Roll20?
Everything's on Roll20. Started with Roll20. I mean, once you start loading on the supplements, you're, all of a sudden you're 4 or 5 supplements in, you build your account up. It's tough to just switch. I think Roll20 is a great platform, and it runs everything.
Absolutely. And we were on Roll20, I mean, obviously through most of the pandemic. And as an experiment, we ran a couple of games on, a few other different types of virtual tabletops like Foundry and that kind of thing. And I think each one of them has their advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah. I mean, obviously with technology, there will be some really cool stuff coming out. But at the end of the day, if you're playing D&D, why bother trying to do special lighting and all this like video effects? I mean, technology's awesome, but it gets in the way a little too much at this point, I think. When we run games on Roll20, we are just like old school, covering the map up, and as players progress, revealing just a little section at a time. When you stay away from dynamic lighting, I think it helps the game flow more. kids get frustrated.
Especially if the technology gets into the way of the fun.
Which does not happen too much. I mean, look, what is the biggest complaint about online play? It's the ability not to communicate as a group effectively, right? I mean, Zoom does not allow group chat.
Right. One person is generally talking and it kind of dominates the channel.
Yeah, if all of a sudden you and I are talking at the same time, no one can really hear. And imagine if there's 4 players plus one DM, it's too much. So, I mean, there's a way to kind of maybe alleviate that and just, use the kind of turn order, combat turn order, turn it into a social turn order. So that helps a little, but it's never as great as in person.
Sure. Believe me, I miss gaming in person. Both of my, 2 of my 3 gaming groups that the 2 who could do in person are having that conversation again. So I can't wait till we get back in person.
Even the in-person groups, it's just tough with scheduling.
Sure.
Right? There's just like that little advantage. I don't have to drive 30 minutes to my buddy's house. Okay. Well, yeah, let's just jump on.
Right. And there's an advantage there. And I'm all for anything that lets people play. I've had people basically kind of come up to me and say, like on a previous episode, you mentioned that you like, X virtual tabletop over Y virtual tabletop. And I'll immediately say, look, if you guys like whatever, our Arcana or a home written thing, or you want to set up a camera and do it over Zoom, go with the gods, my friend. That, is anything that allows you to game and anything that your group can either work with or enjoy, then yeah, I'm all for it. Now, suppose someone listening wanted their child to join a game on adventuringportal.com. What would they need to know going in? Like, do they need any experience with RPGs?
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. One of the questions a lot of parents ask me is, does my child need to know anything beforehand? Or, they'll come in with a group and say, well, his friend or her friend or their friend has experience, but not my son or daughter. And I mean, I kind of love to use maybe golf tennis analogy. When you're playing tennis, if you have 2 people that are different levels, there is absolutely no way for everyone to have fun. If you play golf, 2 people with different levels, then the good person can play their own game, and the person that is terrible at golf, like me, can play their own game. And as long as we can walk at the same pace, we can both enjoy the game together. The point is, you need nothing to start playing D&D, just your imagination.
Excellent. And they don't even need dice or character sheets or anything else. You supply all of that.
No. Of course, everything's on Roll20. It's all in one. We recommend people have a laptop with a mouse, but plenty of people play on their iPods, and sometimes they share microphones, and we recommend headphones, but it's not necessary.
What I'd like to do is you've DM'd for both adults and children. I'd like to ask you some questions about maybe the differences of DMing for kids.
Let's do it.
What do you change about, say, a narrative or a plot for the adventures that you run for kids? Like, do you have to change scope or stakes of the adventure or anything?
Not really. We do not change anything significantly. Of course, running a game for kids is different, right? It has to be. They're children. But the basics of running a game are the same, right? Everyone who runs a game has to concern themselves with the pacing of the game. They have to think about player engagement. They have to think about group dynamics, spotlighting players, and of course, game preparation. It's all the same. Maybe with kids, there might be a little more preparation. The biggest difference with children is that a lot of times they are experiencing free agency for the first time. When I'm teaching D&D, I put players in a situation where they have to go to the bartender and the bartender gives them a task, right? Very common. But When they get to the bartender says, what do you have to drink? Or what do you have to eat? Sometimes I'll even bring it down a notch. And that might trip up a player who's 8, 9, 10. Maybe they've never ordered for themselves, right? Their parents are always around. And so, some kids, they're experiencing these situations for the first time at the table. And, you really have to kind of be aware of that situation, as well as different like social and emotional situations that for an adult, maybe they've seen around, but for a kid, maybe they've never negotiated a contract before, even thought about negotiating a contract. Who knows?
It's very interesting because I've never thought about that's their maybe their first chance at making some of these decisions for themselves. Is there a tip or trick that you've used to get them to encourage to embrace that agency that they now have?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? How do you get player engagement? I don't know. I mean, with kids, there's maybe a little list. With kids, maybe more than adults. You have to expect animal companions. Mm-hmm. I had been reading a lot about this. People are complaining online. I don't want my game to be like Animal Crossing. But if you're just having fun, why not? Right? Why not have everyone have their bunny rabbit or whatever animal it is? I've seen my players try to tame every animal, whether, a blink dog, mm-hmm. Even when you're like, well, you're not supposed to be able to tame animals that aren't household pets. Boom, it doesn't matter, boom, blink dog. Okay, let's go.
But that's awesome because, it's one of those things where in that case, the rules get in the way of the players having a good time. And
for sure.
If the adventure doesn't, if it doesn't matter that the players have a pet boar, then for the rest of the adventure, then sure, make a roll, see how your animal handling is, or make me a skill check, and let's see what happens.
No doubt. I mean, look, I've got a couple bullet points in mind to talk about.
Please.
There's absolutely no order or significance in terms of weighting here, but certainly, as per what we were just talking about, running your game rules light, that's probably up there, right? Mm-hmm. I don't like to count arrows, spell slots, we'll get into maybe a little more with older kids. Younger kids, maybe I won't even say anything. Kids love peaceful resolutions, maybe more than adults, I think. And yet, it's kind of contrary to what I'm about to say, but it's no surprise that combat is the most popular pillar.
That's been my experience as well, especially when I've run a few one-shots for neighborhood kids, friends, that kind of thing, who want to get introduced to the hobby. And combat was definitely the thing that they enjoyed the most. Well, it actually dovetails nicely into one of the questions that I have for you, which is, sometimes when you're DMing, especially for younger kids, the players can really get rowdy and it can get chaotic and kind of crazy. What are your tips to kind of try to rein that back in and try to get people back on track as far as the adventure goes?
That really does get under the kind of possible murder hobo umbrella as well. Sometimes you have to let off a little steam. Sure. But if you have a group and, one or two players are getting rowdy and maybe you're feeling like the other players aren't really feeling that, then, sometimes you have to try to nip anything in the bud as soon as possible. Obviously, you have to be more reflective and think about, is this a game pacing issue, right? Are you just like reading box text? There's some things to do. In the best case scenario, the players around the rowdy players themselves are taking care of the situation. But that doesn't always happen, right?
Right.
You cannot rely on that for sure if you are the adult at the table.
You may have to manually shift that spotlight to, hey guys, Lori hasn't spoken in a few minutes. Lori, what's your character thinking right now? And so you may have to kind of take that control and interject a little more forcefully than you may have to with adults. Agree?
Agreed, 100%. And that's where I love the use of the turn order as a social turn order, because then it's like you don't have to be like, yo, your time's up. You establish how the game is going to run, and that's what you do every single time. So sometimes that helps too, right? There's no magic bullet though.
Kind of take it as it comes, hold on and ride the bull for as long as you can.
Yeah, I mean, that's like classroom teachers we deal with that all the time. How do you deal with a rowdy class?
So whenever you're describing a scene, like a non-combat scene, like maybe they're adventuring from place to place or they're going in a dungeon from room to room, do you have to change your style about what you describe and the information that you provide, et cetera, for children compared to, say, describing that same room for adults?
That's a great question. My quick answer is no. And here's why. Because I am not a huge fan of really anything beyond like a 3 bullet point description. When a new scene occurs, you have like 3 bullet points in mind that you want to get across in terms of description, right? Maybe there's some actions that are happening, that's separate. But if you're just describing something, just have 3 bullet points in your mind, go forth, try not to be too verbose, plain speak, and be open to questions and answers.
Do you find, you mentioned that the kids that you've DM'd tend to find some non-combat, non-violent resolutions for a lot of situations.
Yes.
Do you find that kids focus on different things in your adventures than maybe you would expect, say, older kids to do?
No, I think kids focus on what image you as the dungeon master try to present. Very open, maybe not as cynical as adults, a little more open. Again, it's like they are experiencing tropes for the first time. I'm all for not starting an adventure in a tavern. Mm-hmm. But, for kids, they've never even been to a tavern. So, what are you going to do?
No, that's true. And I have to admit, one thing that I cheat whenever I'm having to, like, for example, improvise a plot point or a little mini adventure. Kids haven't seen a lot of movies. So there's a lot of stuff that you can borrow from, say, the 2000s, the 90s, maybe even further back if you have gray in your hair like I do. Yeah. It's like they have no idea that they're actually just reliving the entire plot of Die Hard.
Yeah. But look, let me circle back to tips for running a game for kids, because I think that's a pretty interesting topic. For sure, you have to shorten the length of a game. For adults, sometimes you hear about adults playing games, the sessions that are 4, 5, 6 hours. That's never going to happen with a kid. 2 or 3 hours max. Mm-hmm. We talked about really rules light being important. Certainly, I think this is the same in person, but you have to use theater of the mind rarely. I think having as many manipulatives, assets, anything physical is awesome for a kid. And when I said earlier about the preparation being just a little bit more for kids than adults, I guess what I'm talking about is when you run a game for children who are new to the game, whether they think they're new to the game or not, you always have to be ready to present their option, because sometimes, someone will get in the habit of their longsword roll was awesome, so they keep using it, even though, maybe they're a magician or magic user. So it's just nice to, present options all the time. Be ready all the time to present options, because you're teaching the game, right?
Sure. What other tips would you have for, DMs who've been asked to DM or GM for a younger crowd?
Certainly you have to have a strong session 0. set the tone, make sure everyone's on the same page, know what they will expect. I love to use at the end of each game stars and wishes. Have you used that in your games before?
I have not. Can you explain it?
It's pretty cool. First of all, in no way did I invent this. I mean, I told my wife about this and she's like, oh yeah, we've been using that, in the teaching profession for decades. Okay, here's how it goes. At the end of every game, and this works for adults as well, you go around the table and you ask everyone, what is one cool thing someone else did in the group? Right? And that's the star.
Right.
And then the wish is just a simple, like, what's something you want to see in the next game? But by nailing those two questions as a DM, as someone that's running the game, one, you're getting the critical feedback, right? What do you want to see? That's the wish. Mm-hmm. But the star is really interesting. You're not being asked, what's one cool thing you did? You're being asked, what's one cool thing someone else did? When you think about that, that's another way to increase teamwork, the unity of the group. It's also another way to kind of teach empathy, right? It really throws people off the first time. And then the second time, they're prepared. You can kind of see like someone making a note during the game, like, oh, I'm going to say that. Mm-hmm. But look, you need to demonstrate the fun. You don't have to use silly voice or accent, but that helps. You certainly need to show your players how awesome the game is, mm-hmm. right? And we talked about murder hobos. Sometimes, you have to expect it. Obviously, it's not always okay. I know that you did a whole episode on that.
Right.
But you just, again, don't be surprised if that happens. Why? Because kids are coming directly from video games. And that teaches murder hoboing, right?
It does. You're right.
Every first-person shooter is a murder hobo situation.
And they're taught over and over again, if gun doesn't work, get bigger gun.
You're right. Look, I said it at the start. I'm a gamer, so
right.
I know. When you're introducing kids to Dungeons and Dragons, of course, they're going to have the video game mentality. And so you have to fight that mentality. And that is the murder hobo mentality. Sometimes, someone that's not playing a lot of first-person shooters isn't going to come into D&D with that. But sometimes, someone that's fresh off a game that's all about killing, that's all they want to do. So you have to show them the fun, right? D&D, it's not a winning or losing game. You can explore and interact, foster your imagination, show the collaboration. It's tough in the beginning, but you have to demonstrate why tabletop role-playing games, yeah, we're talking about D&D, but, we can switch D&D out for Vampire or some other game, but, let's stick with D&D.
Right.
I mean, that's why video games are not as good as playing with your friends.
And the thing that I've had to, probably the biggest wow moment I see in a lot of players' eyes who have never played RPGs before, and maybe they came from a video game background. In video games, for example, you might be in the town of whatever, Ravensclaw, and there are mountains off in the distance, but you can't go to them because there's an invisible wall, or there's, the plot won't take you there. Whereas around the table, if they say, well, I want to go visit that mountain way off in the distance. Theoretically, if you've prepared as a DM, or if you can improvise a little adventure doing that, they can go do those things. There's not the programmer hasn't prepared this for you, so you can't go do that.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, you've got options. Now, there's one last topic I wanted to make sure I brought up, Paul. One of the things that you and I had briefly discussed, and I found a lot of information about on your website, is your games are neurodivergent player friendly, right?
Sure, for sure. Dungeons and Dragons, as much like exactly what we were just talking about, right? You can do anything. You can go anywhere. Yes, all of that's true. There's improvisation, but Dungeons and Dragons is also a game that follows a strict pattern, right? Every game follows the same pattern. You, as the storyteller, AKA Dungeon Master, Game Master, start the same. You describe the scene, your players tell you what they want to do, you roll the dice tells the story, and then you repeat. Is that fair?
That's fair. Oh, that's very fair. I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So with that kind of structure in mind, Dungeons and Dragons is an amazing game for anyone that's neurodivergent. It builds social skills. It's fun. It's engaging. It allows a huge chunk of time for parents to kind of do their own thing while their kids are playing. And, that pattern that a player can rely on, there's a lot of safety in that, right? Even with all that improvisation within the game of Dungeons and Dragons, that basic pattern's the same. I mean, combat, well, there's not a lot of improvisation with combat. Sure, you can add description, but, roll the dice. Is your dice roll higher than the AC? Yes, no. Then what's the damage, right? That's always the same. And so I think that pattern really helps a lot of players. And, through playing D&D, I think people get feel a self-worth, right? A valued member of the team. And, again, back to that pattern, it, relieves any anxiety. There's no pressure to, all of a sudden go into some crazy accent. Role playing, it's more than just accents, right? Our games are incredibly neurodivergent friendly. I think all our players have fun.
Excellent.
Yeah. And do we do anything different for someone that's neurodivergent? I mean, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Every group is different. But I mean, just like running a game for kids is a little different. Yeah. I mean, you have to be prepared to maybe turn off the music if, that might be annoying. You talk to the parents beforehand, make sure everyone's on the same page, kind of try to understand if there's any triggers you need to know about. But I mean, just like anyone else, I mean, everyone loves a good map, right? Everyone loves a good tangible. One thing I love to encourage is everyone have a physical character sheet. You don't need it at all, but if someone has one little tiny 13 computer in front of them and roll 20 is up, oh, that's too much. You have to have a lot of space. I work with 2 screens and sometimes I want 3.
Here's the problem, Paul, and here's what I'm going to tell you. I've got 3 screens. I want 4.
Yeah. Okay. I hear you.
So that's the bad news. It never ends. I could put a 4th one right up here and I would be very, very happy. And then probably after I did that, I would want to start another column over here and make a 5th. So
I hear you. And look, I just bought a new camera. I want the newer version.
I think that happens to all of us, unfortunately.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Now, you run games all throughout the year on adventuringportal.com, right?
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
I was going to say, and if somebody wanted to reserve a seat at one of your tables, if somebody wanted to have their child join an adventure with you, how would they do that?
Ooh, thanks for asking. Yeah, I mean, look, just simply go on adventuringportal.com. You'll see our phone number. It's a place to email me. I put together all the games. I used to say they were hand curated, which is a fancy way to say I put them together. Right. But look, maybe if any of your listeners are interested in running a game for Adventuring Portal, we're open to that as well.
So, Paul, what questions have I not asked? What topics would you like to cover that maybe we haven't had time to before now?
We've talked about player engagement, how to increase that, which, there is absolutely no magic bullet, right? There's no one quick answer there. We've talked about D&D for neurodivergent players. We haven't really talked about D&D in education.
That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah. Want to hear a little lesson plan that I whipped together for this?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sure. I come from the classroom, and it is a dream for educators to have the time to play D&D in the classroom. If you are teaching in the public school system, there is no space for free time, right? It's all test scores, test, teach the test. Maybe that changes a little bit. Some places, yes, no, whatever. But it's tough. However, Dungeons and Dragons can still be used in a classroom as one piece to the educational puzzle or the educational pie. And I'm thinking cross-curricular, right? So obviously you can teach math, addition and subtraction. Numeracy is huge, right? But when I say cross-curricular, I'm talking about having one adventure, like a one-shot, right? Something short, 3-hour one-shot that you would play in a classroom, whether it be homeschool or in an actual public school classroom. Break it up into all the major subjects. So, writing, math, social studies, science, art, even music, right? Props to music. Sorry, I'm just not a musician, so I think of that last. A little one shot, whatever it is, right? You have someone comes to you with a simple task and you're sent on a mission, right? Lesson 1 would be writing, right? Create your character's backstory, right? Start with a 1-page rough draft, do a whole pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, and at the end, bam, you have yourself a nice little 2 or 3 paragraph backstory of your character. Bam, lesson 1. Then you can get to the good stuff, which for me is math. The great thing about Dungeons and Dragons, there's so many different math lessons around, but the best thing about D&D is that it reduces math phobia.
That's a good point.
I'm not good at math. I'm that's an attitude, right? Every math teacher hears that, right? Even if it's the parents, I don't know how to teach Johnny this, whatever. By playing D&D, you are around numbers so much that you just naturally increase your numeracy. You are comfortable around numbers. Now, obviously, if you have to put a little lesson, I like to, what weapon to choose, right? Say, your sword is +3 or whatever statistics you want to throw up in front, but a sword versus a spell and, look at that whole little matrix and teach about that. Social studies, you can bring in, scarcity of goods, all types of politics, situations come into play. And for science, I saw a really cool article where someone was a high school chemistry teacher, and he was designing a unit around chemistry, which for my players, everyone's elementary school, middle school, so chemistry doesn't fly. But, if you think about what kind of science would you see if you visited a forge, right? What about doing battle? Or what kind of science would you see just traveling normally on the road? You can hit every major topic, every major science topic with those broad subjects. I don't know, wrap it up maybe with art. I'd love to talk about mazes and labyrinths, You draw your own maze or labyrinth. That's always cool. And then music. I'm not going to embarrass myself, but there's plenty of room for music lessons there, right? I have blog posts about each one of these, or I talk a little bit more in depth and show what examples and what an actual lesson plan might look like.
And those blog posts are over on adventuringportal.com?
For sure.
Any parting wisdom or parting words for people who are going to be DMing for younger players?
Show the fun and rules light.
That's true. You don't want to pull out the Pathfinder 2e 600-page core rule book and say, all right, we're going to go through this entire thing. Let's talk about grappling. No.
Right.
No, make it easy on them, absolutely.
Yeah. Again, we do not really change our adventures just for kids. Just, sometimes maybe a little more rules light.
That sounds good. Paul, I greatly appreciate you taking some time this afternoon.
Thank you. The honor's mine.
This week, it was my great pleasure to speak with Paul Lazrow of adventuringportal.com. He provided great tips for DMs running games for younger players. From my and Paul's experience, many kids can discover a lifelong passion with the right introduction to it. If you have a young player who's interested in attending a session with a professional dungeon master, please head over to adventuringportal.com, sign up for a session. My son had a blast in his sessions with Paul. I bet yours will too. If you like the podcast, please help me spread the word. Post about it on social media, tell your friends, rent a blimp and scream through a bullhorn at your neighborhood to listen to the podcast. Okay, maybe not the last one, but I appreciate everyone who helps me spread the word. Next week, I will keep it a little highbrow because I want to discuss the philosophy of die rolls, when you should roll dice, and more importantly, when you shouldn't. Before I go, I want to thank this week's sponsor, Chairs. Like most people, I have an old favorite comfortable recliner. We go way back together. This has been episode 123 of the Taking 20 podcast, the interview with Paul Lazrow of adventuringportal.com, all about DMing for younger players. My name is Jeremy Shelley, and I hope that your next game is your best game.
The Taking 20 podcast is a Publishing Cube media production. Copyright 2022. References to game system content are copyright their respective publishers.